because leaders are becoming almost a anti or reverse anthropomorphization of technology. We're now adapting technological expectations into the human experience. We need to be that fast. We need to be that accurate. We need to work that quickly. That's not what humans do well. AI does it really well, but what does it mean to be human today? Is what I
Yes,
think is
yes.
really interesting, because now we're being asked the question for the first time in the history of our species, because we now have AI challenging a lot of the things that we used to think were human. What does it mean to be human? And to me, the greatest expression that cannot be replicated of humanity, aside from love, is this intuitive conversation that we're having, is the connection with other people.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Intuitive Leader podcast with me, Maurice Jenkens. And earlier today, I was joined by Dean Newlund. Dean has had a rich career, working for over 30 years in global leadership across 5 continents and 19 countries. He's been the CEO of Mission Facilitators for over 28 years. It's a boutique consulting firm headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona, where he has been focusing on team and leadership development for, among other, Fortune 500 companies. He's also one of the early and recognized TEDx speakers on topic of intuition with his talk, Why Business Needs Intuition, back in 2019. And he's also been hosting a podcast for over 5 years called Leadovation. And I was fortunate enough to be a guest speaker on his podcast as well. I can tell you, Dean is a gifted storyteller, and I promise you a fascinating dialogue. And we're going to talk about reading the energy of the room and the unique human quality of sincere connecting, the challenge explosion, which is really about a story about ignoring your hunches. And Dean will also share some of his personal stories with his typical sense of humor, and among other, how he was ignoring his intuition when he was walking down the aisle to get married. And also, we'll talk about intuition as a marker for authenticity and truth, and the courage it takes to adhere to that and disrupt a project that is already invested in. And we're going to talk about leadership and AI and what it means to be human and have human capacities, and how we can use our human intelligence without actually competing with AI. I promise you an energetic dialogue with a fantastic guest. So listen in. Good morning, Dean. It's so nice to have you on.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, so we know each other by now. I've been on your podcast. Now you're on my podcast. But before that, I actually saw you already when you did your TEDx talk, and that immediately sparked my interest. I thought, well, I want to speak to you. So I'm very happy to have you on today. And but let me start out the first question, which I always ask, and that is, what is intuition according to you?
It's a great question. And I was thinking, I knew you were going to be asking me this question. So I was trying to find a definition that I wrote a while back. I had a guy on my podcast a while back by the name of Chip Conley. And I met Chip over at Harvard at a coaching conference for leadership and for healthcare. And we ended up striking up a conversation. And he asked me in an email, I said, so what's the difference between wisdom and intuition? Because I think sometimes we conflate those two different definitions. Wisdom, you might say, is the accumulated knowledge and experience of a person's life, the lessons learned, the life of hard knocks and of good knocks, if you will. That overall, you kind of know, hey, I've been through business for 20, 30 years. I know the economies come and go. I'm not exactly, fond of the fact that we have an economic downturn, but I can get through it. Wisdom sort of tells you those sort of things, your life experience. So I was thinking about intuition when he asked me that question, and I wrote down here, intuition leverages wisdom and the subconscious's ability to recognize patterns that the conscious mind might overlook. It draws on the brain region that doesn't involve language, which is why intuition often manifests as a feeling or an inner knowing. So that's what I
Mhm.
wrote back in, I guess it was May of, gosh, it was almost a year ago that I
Okay.
wrote
Yeah.
that to Chip. And I still think that's not a bad little definition.
No, not at all. It sounds pretty good. Sounds pretty good. So, but that is like, what is your definition? I mean, if you would end up in a bar somehow, if you would having a beer somewhere, or and I would ask you, what is intuition according to you, or how do you experience intuition? How do you know? That's my gut.
Well, I think those are two separate questions, but the first one I think
Mm,
is still kind of goes back to that definition. In some ways, intuition taps into that larger space. And it
okay.
sounds so woo-woo, but I don't believe it
Mm,
is. I think that there is a certain kind of universal energy that we're all connected to. If you think about
mm,
the science and the physics of matter, there's really nothing here. When I knock on my table, it's really a bunch of energy that's
mm,
holding these tiny little protons and neutrons together. And even that could be debated as not really anything but energy. And so if you get into the microscopic area in which we all live, it's nothing but a sea of energy. And
mm,
so we're connected to all this energy in some way,
mm,
shape, or form. We sort of put these barriers that our bodies is the guardrails of our existence. You know, my shoulders, my head, my fingers, my toes, and that's as far as I go. I don't really think that's the case. I think that this energy of which we are all a part connects us to so many other things that the conscious mind doesn't necessarily realize, but the
mm.
intuitive mind does. And so I think intuition is a greater expansion beyond our own four walls of our bodies.
All right. Okay. That's interesting. I mean, it's what you say that if you drill down, if you were to take a microscope and an infinitely strong microscope, and you would drill down and down and down and down, at the end, you end up with strings of energy
Yes.
that basically connects us with others in one way or the other,
Yes.
or everything is connected via those strings of energy. So at some point, there is a physical connection, even if you can't see it, and if it's not there, it seems to be not there, but there is something that is connected.
Yes. Exactly.
Interesting.
Yep. And then we didn't call it a physical connection. You know, to your definition, I would call it an energetic connection. You know, it's like you go into a bar, you go into a meeting, you go into a person's house, you immediately have a sense of the energy that is in this space that you've just entered into. You get off a plane in a new city. You can begin to feel like, oh, okay, I'm in Vegas. Not just because I'm hearing the cling, cling, cling of the slot
Mm,
machines, because it's a
mm,
certain energy, there's a certain vibration. There's a different energy because I kind of bifurcate my time. We have our business down in Phoenix, Arizona,
mm,
115-degree heat during
mm,
3 or 4 months of the year, flat, cactus, scorpions, big sky, dusty and heavy on energy with movement and speed
mm,
and you know, business is very vibrant there. And then I spend most of my time when I'm at home in this place called Bend, Oregon, which is on the eastern slopes of the Cascade Mountains. Green, flowers are out. I've got deer munching on my flowers, sometimes to my chagrin, but there
mm.
is a much different energy in this environment. And I happen to love both. I wouldn't want one without the other. But that's the kind of that energy, that universality that we enter into, that I think intuition, if we tap into it, is in a sense an extension of the ability to be present in your space and what's going on around you, not only inside but outside, and be able to derive some sort of inner knowing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, if you would stand somewhere next to a person that that is very different from you, or that may not like you, you would probably feel at odds. You would feel discomfort. Whereas if you would be in another bucket of energy next to people that love you would feel different. You would feel probably a lot better. I mean, this is the reading the room kind of thing, right?
Right, right, exactly. I'm beginning to read a book. I don't know, it's around here somewhere. One of my clients is wanting us to do some help with them. It's called Unreasonable Hospitality. So
Okay.
this
Mm,
person who ends up having essentially the highest rated best restaurant on the planet, and he writes a book about it. So it's not just the food, it's the energy that he creates in this restaurant that makes him so attractive. And so I think that companies are beginning to realize that this sense of energy and space is not just what we do, but how we do it and how we show up, and
Mhm.
how we be, as woo-woo as that sounds. And I think your intuitive abilities spring forth from that.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, and also you know, I mentioned your TEDx talk. I think that was about 4 years ago in Bend,
Correct. Yes.
so it's 21 then, and that was one of the absolute first TEDx talks that I've seen on topic of intuition and the science behind it, and it was so. Please tell me a little bit, like, how did you? Well, first question, how did you end up doing that TED talk? Just the story behind it. But also, there was one in particular, one story there that you are sharing there. It's about a challenger,
Mm, it's a
and
great story. Yeah.
it is, it really is. So,
Yeah.
would you mind sharing that?
I think that, look, so the backdrop on the TEDx talk was, it was probably just one of those goals. I wanted to get on
Mm,
stage and to challenge myself. I think at the time, as I may remember, that we had a very tough spring where one of the people that we had hired as a subcontractor, who was also a personal friend, made a huge mistake and somewhat sloppy, and we lost a large client as a result of it. So we kind of got, hit in the gut. It was like, oh God, that hurt. And it was tough. Financially was sort of tough. And the friendship, we lost the friendship. It was the right thing to do. And intuition told me I should have done it long before, but I
yeah,
didn't. And so
usually the case.
I'm starting to investigate, like, what was all that about. And so I'm going, like, yeah, my intuition knew, why didn't I? And I guess I wanted to keep the friendship and not wanting to rock the boat and all that kind of stuff. And all those people out there who have somebody on your team that you think probably should move on because your intuition says so, you probably should take action on it, because it's not going to go away. But anyway, so I started thinking about that, about how important intuition was in my life. And I was reflecting on my decision to move out of Minneapolis and to quit my job and to move to Seattle and to start over. And there was no reason in which to do that, other than I just
Mm,
sort of felt this strong desire. My parents were saying, "You're absolutely nuts. Why are you doing that? You got all your support here." And they didn't know anything about starting a business, but I did so and found not only the business started once I arrived in Seattle, but I also met my wife that I have been married to now almost for 30 years. And there was a calling, truly, like you think about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. I got a phone call that said, "You're supposed to be in Seattle by the 12th of July, 1992." And it, like, I literally had to get my life oriented to get to Seattle by that date. And in some ways, I didn't know why. It was the strongest call I'd ever had in my life. And so I did it, and it changed my life completely. The business started, the marriage started, and my life in some ways really started at that point. So then when I started reflecting on all this, I thought, well, let's do a TEDx talk, right? And so I
mm,
found that there was somebody in town who was a TEDx coach. We met up, and you go through the application process. You have to come up with an idea worth spreading. I at first didn't even get chosen. I was sort of like an alternate in case somebody gets sick, and I
yeah.
hate being alternate.
Plan
But
B.
it turns out they got me in,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I
Mm,
had 12 minutes to do this thing, and it was nerve wracking. Um, so it was a great experience. I learned a lot about public speaking and about preparation for a speech like that, and it was it was really wonderful. Now the Challenger experience that you had referenced,
mm,
Maurice, was it a anecdote or an example of intuition on a massive scale that I think most people can understand and remember. And we've also got a kind of a personal connection to the Challenger explosion as well, in my wife and I. In some ways, Challenger was part of what helped us launch our business, no pun intended. So
okay. Mm,
the story in the business was, my wife at the time had a very successful floral design business, and somebody had said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to put a corporate program around a multi-million-dollar mock-up of mission control in a spacecraft at the Museum of Flight in Seattle," because it had been developed as a way to bring children back into science and technology, because when the Challenger explosion happened in the 80s, as you may remember, those of you who remember, there was a teacher from New Hampshire that went up and didn't come down. So all these parents are going, oh my God, my kid is now scared of science and technology because it somehow equates to death, right? So we got to do something to counteract that narrative. So they built these Challenger Learning Centers all over the United States, and they were a huge hit, but sometimes they would get requests from large corporations to say, hey, this looks like fun. Could we bring our team in here to do something similar? And they would say, we don't know how to do a corporate version of this. And so that's where we came in. And we did that. And that brought us into the limelight of Microsoft and Weyerhaeuser and AT&T and Alaska Airlines. We got on radio shows and talk shows and had articles written about it. It launched us into Fortune 500 space that we'd always been trying to get into. Now, all of a sudden, we had 3 or 4 of these Challenger Learning Centers running up and down the West Coast of the United States. And for a while, we were like, it was a great window to launch us into so many different companies. So there was a great opportunity for us. So the Challenger itself, going back to your question, is, if you may remember, this was a very cold January day. And there had been, I think, somewhere around 8 or 9 attempts to launch the first Challenger spacecraft, but they kept having to scrub it because of issues. Every time there is an issue, there are dollar signs on the order of millions and millions of dollars that are being lost to the organizations that were being involved in that. And so the pressure is on. We got to get this bird up, right? Another launch delay, another launch delay, another launch delay. And so then I think was it January 12th? And there are these engineers who are feeling a little itchy about launching again because of the fact that it was such a cold day. And the O-rings that connect different parts of the spacecraft are not really tested. And there was not a lot of empirical evidence that it could survive that sort of cold day. If it gets brittle, it breaks apart, issues ensue. But there was no evidence that also said that it couldn't, or, there was just no evidence, period, as far as I can remember, going back and reading some of that stuff. So anyway, basically the story goes is that they were asking for their senior leaders to reconsider the launch on that cold January day because they had a gut feeling, a hunch in what the report later said. The President's Commission on the Challenger explosion. They had a hunch that this didn't feel right. And their hunch...
A hunch in a world full of technicians, engineers, data, all
Correct.
that.
Yeah, data-based decision makers, right? This is all science, man. This is all facts. Yeah. Somebody comes in and goes, hey, excuse me, I got a hunch. This is going to go, screw you. We're going to do this anyway, right? So anyway, we all know what happened. And so, it happened again with the second Challenger explosion, but it was a different situation. But the report that was generated, the President's Commission report on the 2 Challenger explosions, basically cited a lack of healthy culture, communication, and the ability to listen to these hunches. And so that's the story on the 2 Challenger explosions and how it relates to intuition. And I did mention it in the TEDx talk that you talked about.
I can really recommend people to listen to that talk. It's really condensed, informative, and it still holds. I mean, that's what I believe I said to you already for a couple of months ago when we first spoke, that your TEDx talk still holds. It's still relevant. And this now makes even more sense in this data-driven world that we are at. There is a moment where you have to make a judgment. And what's a hunch? I mean, this is also a question that I would like to ask you. Like, is it possible, or maybe not a question, but just a point of discussion, like, is it possible to experience intuition, let's say a hunch, of what is a hunch even? Is it a feeling? Is it a clue? Is it a prompt? Is it anxiety? So is it possible to experience intuition without some sort of feeling attached to it? And I'm asking the question because so often people say, like, feelings is something we shouldn't follow our feelings. It's irrational. It's unpredictable. We can't trust it. But maybe there are feelings and feelings, like there are thoughts and thoughts. You can't trust each thought either. So So basically, what's a hunch, and can you experience intuition without a feeling? Yeah, it's a $1 million question. If you don't have the answer, you are excused.
A great question, Maurice. It's really good. So if it's what is a hunch, or how do you experience intuition, I'll go with a second question
Yep.
first. In that,
Yeah.
as I think that from the people I've talked to, and the podcast that I have right now, it's called Lead Ovation. Prior to that, we called it the business of intuition, as a
Mhm.
kind of a continuation of the TEDx talk that I did that you mentioned. We still talk about intuition in this particular podcast we have now, but we kind of expanded the scope a little bit. But as I've been interviewing people about this, some of them neuroscientists and so forth, hunches get experienced in different ways, or intuition seems to get experienced in different ways. Some people literally hear something.
Mhm.
Other people have like the goosebumps on their arm. They're just something kind of physically, they feel something. There's so many receptors in your stomach, your GI tract, they call
Mhm.
it the second brain. That's why we say that, go with your gut. There's not
Mhm.
just a flippant way of saying that. There's some real science behind the intelligence of our stomachs that is kind of rivals our brains in some ways.
Yeah.
So, and it's, or just sort of, there's a kind of an unconscious feeling about something. So I think you have a different approach to what intuition feels like. For me, I don't know how it's like, everything is physical in some ways, but it's almost like a calmness. It's a kind of a
Mhm.
knowing
Mhm.
about something. And it doesn't mean that what I know is going to result in an action that's going to be easy.
No.
You might go, I know something,
Uh,
but I don't
uh,
want to do it.
uh,
It's like, oh shit, I'm
yeah.
gonna, I was married once before, and I remember specifically, and I talk about this in the TEDx talk, walking down the aisle, and my intuition was going nuts and says, "What are you doing? This is not the right person. This is not the right
Yeah.
time. Why are you doing this?" And I knew kind of, I had the answer to that. I
Uh,
sort of felt like I should. I didn't want to, there was a suggestion by the then mother-in-law that we should get married since we were moving to Minneapolis. There was all those things that were, I knew why my hunch was so strong, and yet I did it anyway. And it
oh,
took
and
2
how does
years,
that
but
feel? Yes.
it felt
Yeah. And
awful.
yeah. Yeah.
I
It
mean, the
feels awful.
knowledge the knowledge was like,
Uh,
it was like, I don't know how you put this, Marie. It was kind of like a major chord on your piano versus a minor chord. It just sort of like there was a an a connection to something that was true, authentic, that was
mm,
real,
mm,
that was universal, that was expansive. And I went,
mm,
that's it. It kind of like got me back into the earth and my feet on the ground, felt real. Now, the result of that meant I probably should have maybe walked away from that and said, no, I'm not doing that. But I did it anyway because the pressure was so strong to
yeah.
continue moving forward. And then it just took 2 years to finally, go back to the intuition and unravel the marriage the way it should have been
Yeah.
unraveled in the beginning.
Thank you for sharing that. It actually reminds me of, my wife and I, we bought a house at some point, and after half a year, we've been renovating the house on the outside and the inside, buying new furniture, the whole riddle. But we didn't feel at ease for lots of reasons, and we didn't dare to say that to each other. It was a big house,
Mm,
expensive, we were indebted. We were really going for it, building family, having a child, and all that. She got pregnant there, so that was really the good news. But
mm,
at some point, we really didn't like to be there. We didn't dare to say it, and at some point, we actually admitted to each other that after half a year, that I don't like being here. No, me neither. Shall we move? And the moment we said that, it became like the heaviness left us. It felt
yeah.
so right. Yeah, we're going to move. It's idiotic. After 6 months, the investment, the money, the energy, the resources, family coming over, painting the house and all that. And then, let's move again. Let's sell it again. And with
Oh,
a loss as well, by the way. But anyway, but it
yeah.
felt right. It was the right decision. So it's,
You get all those sunk costs and all that sunk energy into something, and you don't want to be wrong in it. But I
no,
was just talking
no,
to a CEO a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about a person on her team, and I said, "So forget all the data about this person's performance. What does your gut tell you?"
Yeah.
She said, she's not the right person for my team. So then act on that. Don't wait another 3 or 4 months so that you build up enough evidence that then becomes the reason why you do this. You already know why. Just take care of it now.
That evidence is expensive, right?
Oh,
Costs
God.
time, salary. Yeah.
Right.
But it is difficult with recruitments to speak your mind if your intuition is very clear that it's the wrong person, and to do that in a way that is not being seen as wrong, like politically wrong. That is not easy.
Right. It's not, because you're going to
But
be unpopular.
exactly, yeah. But this is the thing, and this is what you said about these engineers and the challenger, and also with you and your marriage when you were walking down the aisle,
Mm,
and also the example of the house that I just mentioned.
mm,
Intuition is not gonna it's not gonna give you the easy way somehow. If the easy way is to open the door and that's it, you don't need intuition for it. But if there's
mhm,
something wrong, then it comes, right? And then it's and that is that is the difficult part. And now, in your TEDx talk, you mentioned that one of the reasons you believe that people not always are open for their intuitive hits is because it's confrontive. It's difficult to adhere to it, and they are you literally said it, written it down here, afraid of what they might find if they follow their intuition.
mhm.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you if you were to go into the state of being intuitive,
Mhm.
then when we get these intuitive hits, if you will, these little voices that come to us, I believe it's like the subconscious mind, the soul, however you want to define it, bringing us back home,
Yep.
bringing us back home to ourselves, bringing us back home to the community of knowledge. This is sounding way woo woo. I get it, but to that sort of the truth, bringing us back home to truth. And so when we get so disconnected from that source, then the intuition says, aha, excuse me, we're over here. The truth is over here. I don't know what you're doing going off on this little experience you're having, but you're not being true. You're not being honest. You're not being authentic to the
Mhm.
highest and best of yourself. So we're going to give you a little poke on the shoulder, a little gurgle in your stomach, a little voice in your ear, so that maybe you will return back to source. And that, I think, is how intuition is trying to bring us back. Now, if we're smart enough, or I shouldn't say smart enough, if we're sensitive enough
Open
and we
enough,
pick
yeah.
up on and open enough, we can
Mm.
hear those subtle clues. It's just, it doesn't come through in an email or a text. It's not something that ChatGPT is going to give us. It's this little non-verbal way of bringing us back. And so, to your point, when we have to come back, we might have to buck the system. We might have to say to your wife at the time, or to your manager, or to your friend, or whomever it might be, what truth is. Meanwhile, you've already got sunk costs in another path that is not the right one, that you have to untangle. And your intuition for truth might very well disrupt other people, or could even disrupt the relationship.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
tough,
Yeah.
but in the end, I mean, are you more willing to be in a relationship, whether it be personal or professional, that is based on this type of highest and best, and that we are operating at that level? Or are we there just to get along to get along? And I think when you go to the other route, the second route, the quality of life starts to
Yeah.
diminish, because the peak
Yeah.
moments are those peak moments when we're really connected to ourselves, the highest and best, and maybe they all that is, however you want to put that. And there's juice in that. There's meaning in that.
Yeah.
We're not alone anymore.
No, no. What I hear you say is the word authenticity somehow. It's
Yes.
real.
Yes. Exactly.
So it's very interesting, and very interesting. And you also mentioned a couple of times your own podcast, Lead Ovation, and of
Yes.
course Mission Facilitators. And we haven't touched on that yet. So my guess is that they are connected somehow. Lead
Hmm.
Ovation, the word is innovation. I hear that, but what is the maybe start with your company. What does it do? What do you help your clients with? And just an example, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So the company's name is Mission Facilitators. It's been around since 92, as I kind of mentioned earlier. And it really started back in those days as an executive coaching firm that then grew and became more sophisticated as we got better at what we're doing. Now, if you were to say it in very simple, almost marketing speak, it's three things. We help grow people, we help organizations clarify their visions, and we help them execute on their plans. So when it comes to services, that means executive coaching, that means strategic planning, that means large scale culture change work. It means training and development programs that we will develop and then either do for organizations or we will hand off to them. In many cases, Maurice, we kind of almost become the extension of the company. Like they don't have a large training and development team or an organization development team. We're going to outsource that, almost like you would outsource, a CFO or something, but at a larger level. So we become sort of an extension of them in many ways. It doesn't mean that we don't do one-off programs that last a day or 2 days, but some of the more interesting projects are ones that we've been around for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 years, because we are a member of the family and we're not. We are well known. We understand what's going on. We know where all the bodies are buried. We understand the dynamics, but at the same time, we are separate enough to be able to come in and tell the truth and say things to the CEO or whomever that they may not be getting from their own team because their job is somehow seen as, in jeopardy. So we can play that external role.
Yeah, fantastic. And soon I'm gonna sort of round up this conversation. But before we do that, 2 more questions. One is on if you would have any sort of advice for leaders and managers or founders in terms of intuitive intelligence. But before that question, maybe another one first, and that is on your podcast, Lead Ovation. What's the? I mean, it's an extension from your TEDx talk that you said. But what's the current focus? Why the name Lead Ovation, for example?
Well, it's I think it was to expand the scope a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a fairly niche, and niche is good. If you talk to a marketing company, niche is good. So how many podcasts out there around lead or about intuition, right? Not a lot, maybe a few. You are an exception. That's why I was so happy to meet you. Like, hey, brother, I didn't know that you were around. Good to see you.
It
was wonderful. I was really pleased to hear about you. But it was really to say that we're about intuition. It kind of made it feel like that's all we do, and it's not. We are involved in so many ways to support organizations and our communities that intuition felt a little bit too narrow. It was a backbone, but it's not the whole body. So we kind of felt like we need to kind of adjust the personas that we're going after, and also the name of the show, and so forth. So that was that. I think you asked about a tip or a kind of a suggestion for those people.
Yeah. In terms of imagine that you are a leader and you probably see yourself as data driven or data informed, I would hope. But you have to make tough decisions, navigating unknowns, reading the room, creating psychological safety, levels of trust. I mean, there's a lot of things on your plate, apart from the numbers, of course, the KPIs. So, what would you send them if they came to you and asked for advice in terms of how to use intuition? What would you do?
Well, that's a great question. It's I think you have to create the space for intuition. The problem with managers and leaders within organizations is that we become extraordinarily great doers, but not great beers of being authentic. And we have tremendously busy schedules. Just look at anyone's calendar. It starts at 7 and goes until 7. Then we put the kids to bed and we spend another 2 hours with emails. We work over the weekends. It's just ridiculous. We're kind of creating these unicorns of mega workers who are great at what they do. But even those people, I think my suggestion would be is create some space for yourself. Create a ritual, if you will, that brings you back to your body, brings you back to your authentic self, and find out what that is for you. Like for me, there's a couple of things that happen. I like to write. So when I journal and I just do some free writing in the morning before I check email, before I start the work, I try to get up at least 2 hours before my first work activity. That's my time. That's my space. I may take the dog for a walk. It's to get me back to me, but do some journaling if that's your thing. Walking through nature is a thing. Sometimes sports and those endorphins are a thing. But find a ritual that you can depend on that gets you back to your authentic knowing, and then start to explore that. Start to trust that, and reflect at the beginning of the day, but at the end of the day. To get yourself out of that prefrontal cortex of just doing into something that's more that other side of your brain that's more about this authentic self. And I think the more that we can bring that into the humanity of our leaders, because leaders are becoming almost a anti or reverse anthropomorphization of technology. We're now adapting technological expectations into the human experience. We need to be that fast. We need to be that accurate. We need to work that quickly. That's not what humans do well. AI does it really well, but what does it mean to be human today? What I think is really interesting, because now we're being asked the question for the first time in the history of our species, because we now have AI challenging a lot of the things that we used to think were human. What does it mean to be human? And to me, the greatest expression that cannot be replicated of humanity, aside from love, is this intuitive conversation that we're having, is the connection with other people, and have fun doing it.
Yeah, and have fun. Yeah, on those wise words, thank you, Dean, for being on today.
And again, I'm waiting for you to come over for dinner. I know it's a long drive and you got to get on a plane, but I would love to meet you face to face one day.
I will. I have friends in Arizona, so I will drop by. I will give you a shout. Yes, and likewise,
we've got a few restaurants we got to check out. Yeah,
will do. Well, thank you, Dean.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, and I've added Dean's contact details here below in the comment fields, like his TEDx talk, his company website, and his personal LinkedIn profile, among other. Also, a quick heads up on my program, Decoding Intuition. With Decoding Intuition, I help you trust your own intuition again, so you can reconnect to that sense of purpose or your longing and live the life you really want to live. I will support you in making the right decisions in your life and career to steer towards your passion. And our professional network, IBN, Intuitive Business Network, has gone live. It's a circle for founders and leaders, and we support you in making a sustainable income based on your passion. And finally, if you just want to support or spread the work that I am doing, then feel free to do that in any way you feel appropriate. The subscribing, the commenting, or the sharing, whatever feels right for you. It always helps. That's it for today. Thank you for tuning in, and see you back soon. Bye-bye.